The board of the high-speed rail link project HS2 has vowed to be fully transparent and not overly optimistic when it comes to setting future budget and estimates for construction schedules and beyond. This in relation to the next phase of HS2, the line between the Midlands and Manchester. The overall cost of building HS2 has increased significantly from its 2009 estimate of £37.5 billion. The first phase of the line alone between London and Birmingham is now expected to cost up to £44 billion. But as we recover from the biggest recession in 300 years with a national debt in excess of £2 trillion, big ones, might this money be better spent? And can we afford it for that matter? And with more people working from home or doing remote working, has the dream of high-speed rail been another casualty of the pandemic? To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome Tony Devenish, Conservative London Assembly member for Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster, all the posh bits of London. Henry Fone, grassroots campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. And last but certainly not least, Henry Murison, director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. And Henry, I'll let you state your case for HS2.
I think it's not just my case, it's the case of most of the north of England, the business community, the civic leaders. And there are lots of people who were against HS2, right, and didn't think it was a very good idea. Some of them work at GBNews, and I offered on the money with Liam Halligan, who's a great friend of mine. And Liam and I cut our teeth getting to know each other, fighting about HS2 on programmes like this before there was a GBNews. And he wanted the whole thing getting rid of, right? But actually, when we talk about it now, we're not talking about should we scrap HS2. We're going to build the bit between London and Birmingham that we're already literally digging the tunnels, right? So the chance to cancel it was the Oakley review. And even then, I think it was very clear that it was too late to recover much of the money that had already been spent. And that was a real issue for the government. The challenge is if you just build the bit to Birmingham, you're basically turning Birmingham into a suburb of North London. I mean, you don't get any of the benefits around connecting the West Midlands, so Birmingham and the other towns in the West Midlands better to the north of England. You don't get any of the benefits in terms of connecting places like cities like Derby and Nottingham. Currently, it takes more than 2 hours to get from Leeds to Nottingham, and people don't commute it. Even Sheffield to Leeds, which are literally about 30 miles from each other, it is faster to drive than to get a train between those two great cities in Yorkshire even. So I think that HS2's clearly got lots of detractors. It's also got lots of problems, right? So I don't think that the way it's been built between London and Birmingham is a particularly great advert. But I don't think anyone's proposing we build it the same way. I think all of us who are supporters want change to the way the route to Manchester is done, which is probably nearer readiness. I know there's a hybrid bill waiting to be published, but don't forget there's a section to Leeds and to Sheffield as well as to places in the East Midlands. And without that, there is no way of avoiding having to build more motorways. So if we want to get freight off the roads, we've got to have capacity on the rail network. The rail network in much of the UK is full, and we can't get trucks off the road without building HS2. So the choice you've got to make, right, is do you want to build another M1, another M6, maybe 3 or 4 of them? HS2 gets you the equivalent of a number of 6-lane motorways in terms of capacity. So if you do what we think you should do, which is build new infrastructure and then take passengers off the existing lines so you can have more commuter trains and more freight lines, you avoid the need of having to build other costly infrastructure that actually doesn't do the job as well. It's very hard to get trucks off the road or to decarbonise them. It's the hardest thing to achieve net zero is the haulage industry, because it's just so difficult to get a net zero solution. So on the verge of COP, the idea that we would cancel one of the ways to allow our economy to grow, and we can all be sandal wearers if you want. We can all stop people from travelling between London and the north of England, turn us into a sort of isolated province state. But my vision of the north of England is people can still choose to travel outside the north when they want to. And either they'll drive or they'll go by train. And I'd quite like them to be able to go by train. Thanks very much. Well, great to be with you.
I don't wear sandals. I'm a sliders man like the Chancellor. But Henry, the bottom line is that you're right that the roads were full before the pandemic, but millions of people have been working from home Many will continue to work from home. There is less need for high-speed rail. Why can't we just upgrade the lines we've got?
The challenge is that we've already done that. So about 15 years ago, we spent billions upgrading the West Coast Main Line, and we shut it weekend after weekend. Anybody who lived in the north of England, anyone who was a Man United fan, or most of them obviously live down south, it's probably a little controversial, would have noticed it was very hard to get up north.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's no point being a northern think tanker if you can't make the occasional gag about football on a Friday evening. So the point is, if an upgrade like the West Coast Main Line's already been done, and the problem is on the eastern leg, what we're trying to do is generate demands. At the moment, the trains are so crap between Leeds and Birmingham, only a nutter like me would use them. Everyone else drives. On the western leg, on the West Coast Main Line, people do use that line, but actually, it's people in places like Milton Keynes, right, who can suffer if you want. So we can just stop people being able to commute into London and say no more trains to Milton Keynes. Well, we Northerners will have those train spots to get to London. But actually, I want the whole country to grow, and I don't want the North to have its connectivity to London at the expense of other places that rely on the same commuter links. And that's the problem. What is a Milton Keynes person's train to work is also the train that gets anyone who wants to get to the northwest of England from London and from Birmingham. And that just isn't sustainable.
Yeah, I've worked many times in Milton Keynes, and I can understand why you'd want to get on the train just to avoid those roundabouts. But Tony Devenish, isn't the point about HS2 that it's an expensive, discredited New Labour idea?
That sums it up very, very well, Mark. The only difference between New Labour and now is it's going to cost tens of billions more now. And all we have here is a scheme that I worked much of my career in the infrastructure world. People clearly want this from that industry because it creates jobs. But actually, there's a shortage of people to work on these projects. You could reallocate these people, engineers across the UK, to do far more useful projects. This is the ultimate white elephant. It's like one of those airports built in the north of Japan that nobody uses. The idea that people post-COVID, and I wrote a report 2 years ago when the project was nonsense, but now post-COVID, you've made the points very well, Mark. People are working differently. Most people think they're only going to go into the office perhaps a couple of days a week, maybe even a couple of days a fortnight. The idea that we are going to make this payback in 120 years, or frankly in a millennium, is just pie in the sky. This is a ridiculous project. There's so many other ways. Henry's completely wrong. We can actually do far more to actually improve many of our rail across the country. There's lots of smaller projects. I'm a project manager by background. Smaller projects usually pay back far better than these white elephants. This is Le Grand white elephant. And who knows how much it's going to cost? You talk about 30 billion, 40 billion, 50 billion. So there's even been figures up to 80 and 90 billion. Who knows? And none of the team on the project are prepared to stand behind a cost and say it's a fixed cost at a fixed time scale. This is, I'm afraid, and I'm very loyal to the government normally, this is a ridiculous project and needs to be canned now.
Le Grand White Elephant. Tony, do you mind not using French on the show? We're currently at war with them. Harry, what do you think about this? You were certainly raised your eyebrows at some of the remarks made by my good friend Henry.
Yeah, I mean, Tony was absolutely right in his remarks. I mean, when this project was first conceived and the initial benefit-cost ratio was calculated, they put it at 2.3, meaning that every pound that was spent, we were going to get 2.3 pounds in return. Now we're seeing that even that by some government estimates, as we saw in the Oakervie report, that could be as low as 1.1. And the Chancellor, or when he was Chancellor, Philip Hammond, said that if the benefit-cost ratio were to fall below 1.5, he would have serious concerns about the project. And I don't think 1.1 will be the end of it, because that's loosely based on a cost, final cost of around £100 billion. Now, I've seen estimates that are quite believable and done by infrastructure experts that put it near 150 or even 170 billion pounds. And there, you're going to soon see that the benefit cost ratio quickly falls below 1. But then when you get into it, there were all the things that we were promised at the start. They promised that this train could go up to 400 kilometres an hour. There were going to be 18 trains per hour. Well, that quickly went away. We're now going to only see top speeds of 360 kilometres, but that's not on most of the route. Most of the route will be at 320. 18 trains per hour is quite frankly laughable. Nowhere in the world runs 18 trains an hour. The closest they get is about 15. And in fact, when the project first opens, it's only going to be running, phase 1 will only be running 3 trains an hour, and that's only into Old Oak Common, because they still don't have a solution to Euston. They still haven't worked out what they're going to do at the Euston terminus. So you're going to get on this train from Birmingham and you can't get to Euston for the first few years till they sort that problem out. It has been a disaster from start to finish. And as Tony said, to solve capacity problems, which possibly won't be problems anymore, because some experts say that rail capacity will only go back to 80% of what it was post-COVID because of, as we're demonstrating now, we're not in studio, we're dialing in, we won't have these demand that we used to have. So, I agree. It is the biggest of white elephant.
Harry, I think I'm sympathetic to the HS2 cause for all of its problems. My argument, Harry, would be, briefly if you can, that you never regret infrastructure, do you? You don't regret the Victorian sewers. You don't regret the engineering ingenuity of the London Underground. You don't regret the magnificent Manchester Metro link. So in the end, even if it's not perfect, HS2 is more infrastructure for this country. And surely in the long term, that will benefit all of us.
No, I would completely disagree with that. As I say, it all comes down to this benefit-cost ratio. We taxpayers are not going to see the benefit of this. A few years ago, the Taxpayers Alliance did a report called the Great British Transport Competition, and we identified 28 other infrastructure projects that could be built for £45 billion. And this is things like east-west connectivity, reinstating old lines that have been closed down, improving motorway connectivity, all sorts of things like that would have had a far greater benefit to people than HS2 ever will do, all for £45 billion. And even if we give ourselves 10 billion headroom in there, we're still under the original estimates of HS2, or I should say the second estimates of HS2 at £56 billion. And this is the thing, the costs keep on skyrocketing. I don't think, official estimates of around £100 billion will be the end of it. This could well end up costing £150 billion. And now there's doubts about whether phase 2B East will even get royal assent and be completed.
Henry, it's 2 against 1. The clock's against us. In a few seconds, final words.
The point with HS2 is it's part of an integrated network. The lines are also used in the north to get people east to west. So the problem with the arguments that have been presented is it doesn't reflect the reality of this scheme. So the original project was about a north-south railway. That's not what's on the table now. The north of England, the Midlands have worked to make a lot more out of this project than just about getting to London. It's also about getting people from Manchester Airport up to the northeast, about getting people from Liverpool to Hull. And that's what we've got to offer. An integrated high-speed network, one the Prime Minister is personally committed to, and he needs to stick by his word, not listen to the naysayers, and genuinely deliver levelling up, not levelling down.
Brilliant stuff. Well, look, gentlemen, I wish we had longer. In particular, Tony, thank you for your earlier comments. Let's get you back on the show again soon. Tony Devenish is the Conservative London Assembly member for Hammersmith and Fulham, Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster. Henry Murison, who you've just heard from, director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Excellent taste in friends there. Liam Halligan, back on Monday. And Harry Fone. Thank you, Harry, grassroots campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance.